So the other day I did something I thought I would never do, which is that I bought a Cameo. You know, those things where you can pay influencers or other celebrities to reach out and say something to you. And it made me feel weird because on the one hand, it lifted my spirits, but on the other hand, I had just pay a stranger to pay attention to me. As the poets have put it, how could something so right also feel so wrong? Well, it turns out I was engaging in what we call a parasocial relationship. And if someone ever said that about you, it's not a compliment. Usually, it's associated with people who are maybe too invested in celebrities or their chatbots and maybe even a little bit delusional. But I'm going to argue something unpopular today, which is that we should be more parasocial, not less. Because the problem isn't parasocial relationships, it's actually how we use them. Rather than the downfall of humanity, I'm actually going to show how parasocial can actually be very pro-social. You know, like what I did there? I have had a couple of years really, as has everyone else in the entire world. And I'm not going to bore you with the details except to say that the final blow was quite literally a bonk on the noggin, just a little concussion. Why not? So I couldn't work, couldn't really socialize with anyone, and I spent a lot of time just kind of laying down in a dark room when I lost access to my normal social life. I started following one creator in particular, and I tore through this guy's content. As sort of recovery dragged on and my isolation dragged on, I took it a step further by paying for a cameo from one of the co-hosts of the program. And I was excited, but also super embarrassed because I thought the word parasociality was derived or somehow related to the word parasite. You know, like something draining, something extractive and exploitative. But linguistically, para actually means near, beside, or alongside, like parallel. For instance, think of paramedicals who work alongside a medical team, or the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for rest and digest. Basically, it kind of chills us out when our sympathetic nervous system is in fight or flight mode.
Sun's getting real low.
Even though a lot of popular culture stories really emphasize parasociality as a kind of crisis in society where people are sort of getting married to their chatbots and all the like, parasociality actually predates AI, social media, and the internet itself. Because the internet is cool, here's an extreme example of parasocial media, Lonesome Gal, which was a radio show that aired in 1951, hosted by a fictional Lonesome Gal who had no name, who had no personal history, but, well, listen for yourself.
Sweetie, no matter what anybody says, I love you better than anybody in the whole world.
It's an extreme and unhealthy example, but the parasociality has been going on for a long time, even amongst people who today would be in their 90s. The earliest reference to parasociality in academia is often thought to originate with Horton Wohl's 1950 article in Psychiatry, where they defined parasociality as the illusion of face-to-face interaction between spectator and performer. And the emphasis on illusion here isn't because people can't tell the difference between like reality and what's on screens. It's more that the authors were writing at a time when new mass media like radio, TV, and newspapers were really pushing content that were organized around the personalities of their hosts. So for instance, like radio shows that would have people call in, or advice columns in papers where people used to write in with like etiquette questions, or think of like Savage Love or Canadian Diamond of Sue Johansson, things like that. Horton and Wohl were describing this new form of interaction, which was characteristically one-sided, non-dialectical, meaning there wasn't a back and forth. Though we could argue that parasocial relationships today are probably more interactive and dialectical than ever before, encouraging clicks and likes and, encouraging user engagement.
Like and subscribe.
But even in the context that Horton and Wohl were writing, describing parasociality, it wasn't really framed as a problem. The authors noted that these relationships could be complementary to normal social life and can have pro-social or productive functions. It's not automatically pathological. This is from a meta-review article, and they summarize some of the ways parasociality can actually be quite beneficial to well-being. There's the idea that parasociality can help with social connection, which is pretty self-explanatory, but also health. Specifically, sometimes media figures or objects of parasocial bonding can be sources of useful information, like whether they display healthy habits or disclose physical or mental health concerns. Maybe your parasocial buddy is going through perimenopause or has struggled with dyslexia, or has experienced some kind of trauma or assault and is speaking out about it.
I will not be shamed. I did nothing wrong.
These disclosures can reduce stigma and help break distorted thinking about these topics. Parasocial relationships online are also a very effective way for exploring different identities and facilitating a feeling of belonging. The article cites research on LGBTQ youth and how forming parasocial bonds with fellow LGBTQ plus media figures can play a really important role in offsetting loneliness, especially if you're from a region or in a community where it is difficult to find like-minded or similar people. More than the illusion of face-to-face interaction between spectator and performer, parasociality allows the spectator, the viewer, to temporarily occupy a specific role. Consider sports. So people scream at the television during games, I've done it, as if they are elite, like strategists or fellow players. Same thing with the baking show competitions or singing and dancing TV competitions. Suddenly, when we're watching it, we get to play the role of the expert judge or the connoisseur or something like that. Probably the only exception to this is It Cake? Because we are in the same position as the judges because they all look real. It is truly the great equalizer. Let's go back to me, the sad professor in a dark room. I remember feeling completely cut off from all the things that made me me. And I had a great deal of fear because as a professor, I need my brains to work. So this particular content creator is focused on offering sort of analysis of reality television shows, which seems like a pretty silly thing, but he takes it very seriously and offers pretty good insights. While I was watching and listening his stuff, it felt like I was able to participate in some kind of analytical thinking about culture again, which is my whole thing, right? So basically, I got put back into the role of a social scientist in a way, and that mattered a lot.
Now, if you'll excuse me.
It wasn't just the content itself or the personality or attachment to a host. It was what engaging with that content allowed me to become. It allowed me to re-enter a role that I had lost. Horton Wohl noted that there was a marginal segment of society that could be targeted by mass media to maximize the illusion of a personal, intimate relationship. And this was especially true for the socially isolated, the socially inept, and people who have experienced social rejection more generally. Though again, they note that parasocial relationships in this context is a very natural thing. It's only when the parasocial relationships become a substitute for autonomous social participation, when it proceeds in absolute defiance of objective reality, that it can be regarded as pathological. So it's not the parasocial relationships themselves that are a problem, it's the unmet needs that people may be trying to satisfy in what is ultimately going to be an unfulfilling way. So risks arise when parasociality really becomes a justification for antisocial behavior, for problematic behavior. When someone becomes obsessed such that they are neglecting other parts of their lives because of their obsession or their attachment to a parasocial figure, or if it creates a sense of entitlement where you feel like you have some sort of moral claim on someone else's time, the right to comment on how their parasocial figures live their lives, who they date, how they dress, etc. That sense of ownership, that can really veer into troublesome territory. Actions like harassment, like stalking, whether because one feels that they have the right to insert themselves in the lives of their parasocial attachments, or whether they do so in the name of the parasocial attachment, for instance, harassing their perceived enemies. So these types of problematic behaviors aren't actually themselves expressions of parasociality. On the sociological side, these types of problematic behaviors are more likely expressions of power, of privilege, and whom we think are people and more or less deserving of respect and protection. And we know that things like harassment and stalking and just the general intrusion on people's lives certainly aren't restricted to one-sided online relationships, right? They actually occur most frequently within the context of our most intimate face-to-face relationships in real life. It's a bummer, but it's true. So I think we want to be careful about conflating those admittedly pathological or problematic behaviors with parasociality. Back in the Hofner and Bond article, they use this term eudaimonic well-being, which I had to look up, and it refers to living a life of meaning and purpose and self-realization. This idea is often contrasted with hedonistic well-being, which I know a little more about, and is derived from gaining pleasure and avoiding pain. And I think my original cringe about my parasociality was the idea that I was trying to avoid reality. I think popular culture portraits of people who are parasocial are often very unflattering. But this paper actually cites a study that claims that people are often primarily driven to engage and attach to these personalities as a form of self-expansion or motivated by personal growth. And my parasocial experience certainly wasn't about escape. It was more about reconstruction. Final ideas. Parasocial relationships are not new. They're not pathological, and they certainly shouldn't be considered moral failures. They are simply a way of being social with our favorite influences, celebrities, or even fictional characters. They become problematic when someone tries to make them replacements for needs and parts of ourselves that they can't possibly nourish. Let's think of it like our body and food, right? So you can try and fill up on junk food, and that might make you feel fine in the moment, but that's not the same as that food actually being nutritive and supporting our wellness over the long term. So we are no longer limited by propinquity. It's a super fun word for how being physically close to others used to determine how we would select who our best friends were, what our jobs would be, and even who we married. We needed to be around. These opportunities need to be around us. But sometimes the relationships that might help us the most are the ones that meet us where we are, alongside our everyday lives, rather than directly in them. In conclusion, used intentionally and mindfully, parasocial relations can be tools, and we can use them in ways that both challenge what we know and can expand our worlds, or we can also use them to confirm what we know and contract the types of people and experiences that we're exposed to. Consider getting parasocial with me by commenting on who your fave parasocial attachments have been and subscribing to the channel. And whether online or offline, stay safe and stay curious.
Back off. Are you trying to take me out for dinner? Like, what's happening here?